Hello and welcome to the second part of our three-part series on card sorting. I'm William Hudson and I'll be taking you through the next 60 minutes, which is in a fairly comparable layout to the first webinar. So about the first 30 or 40 minutes we'll be going through the presentation I've prepared, and then I've got about 15 or so minutes of demonstrations to show you, and we've got some time at the end for questions. And do please ask questions. It's helpful to find out what people are comfortable with and perhaps what they have a little bit of uncertainty about. And certainly, as I say, we have built in time for questions. And I'll show you how to do that. I'll tell you how to do that in just a minute. Let me just remind you where we are in the scheme of things. There we are. Part 2, as I mentioned, basic card sorting analysis. And what I'm covering today is true of most online card sorting processes as well. But we are going to be focusing on our tools, the SynCaps series. But having said that, as I mentioned, most of what I'm talking about you will also find in online sort sites that I'll be talking about. I don't include any screenshots in this particular presentation just because of a lack of time. On my public courses and the courses I run, for example, at the CHI conference, I do show you examples from various online card sorting sites as well. And our next presentation, part 3, is going to be in a week's time if you're following the live webinars. And that will be on advanced analysis and looking specifically at SynCaps version 3, where we're doing a whole number of things which are currently not done by any card sorting packages that I'm aware of, and I think they're very useful and will solve a lot of practical problems if you've been struggling sometimes to make sense of your card sorting results. All of the information from the webinars themselves, that's to say video and audio recordings of the webinars, plus slides, are available at www.syncaps.com, and that takes you into the SynTam website at the right place. And so here you'll see the little card sorting directory, and if you're interested in just downloading the videos or the videos of the webinars, we also have some other short videos, which is the slight complication there. Here's what we have at the moment on this page. The first of the 60-minute webinars, and that's just down here. So you can watch that on screen, courtesy of YouTube, or you can go and look at it on YouTube if you want to, but you can watch it embedded here, or you can download it. So here it is underneath as an MPEG-4 and also as a WMV. The WMV, just because of the way these files are created by Citrix GoToWebinar, is slightly higher resolution and slightly more compact. It sounds a little bit backwards, but in fact the smaller file is the better quality in this particular case. But there isn't really much in it. It is all screen capture, so there isn't much to miss, as it were. And then the third item you'll see here is, in fact, the PDF of all the slides. And we'll be doing that for each of the 3 webinars. Following on a bit further are the short videos I prepared a few years back on how to specifically deal with paper card sorts. So that's what these are about. And these are relatively short. The top one is not quite 4 minutes. Excuse me. The second one is 5 and a bit, and so forth. So those are relatively short. Resources, I mentioned this last time. I'll just briefly go through it again. Excuse me. The first is an article that I wrote years ago for Interactions magazine, which is also on our website at that URL. That's from about 2005, and really was the precursor to SynCaps version 2. So SynCaps version 2 came out a little while after that, and it incorporated a lot of the different analyses and approaches that I talk about in the article. I also am responsible for the Interaction Design Encyclopedia article on card sorting, which you'll find at bit.ly/IXD-card sorting. As I mentioned already, we have a number of videos and other free resources, plus also our paid-for SynCaps version 2 and SynCaps version 3, which is coming, all at www.syncaps.com. And then finally on YouTube itself, if you just search for CAPS card sorting, you'll come across those short videos I mentioned. But as I said already, they're also on the SynCaps page. The course I mentioned last time, I didn't have the time and date of it then, but I do now. So that will be at the CHI conference in Paris on the 30th of April from 2 o'clock to 5:20 in the afternoon. And as I mentioned last time as well, we have a series of 16 Guerrilla UCD webinars, and each of those is 90 minutes, and number 7 of those is all about card sorting. Questions, as I promised, if you're watching the live webinars, then you'll have a question interface through GoToWebinar, so do please make use of that. And I am happy to take questions as we're going along, but we also have time built in at the end. You can also email me with questions if you're watching the recording, or if the questions only occur to you after the end of the webinar, then email me at william.hudson@syntam with a silent G. I really wish I'd gone for the slightly more regular spelling, which is syntagma, but this is a known variant, and it seemed like a good idea at the time, but the G silent in this variation, so SYNTA silent G m.co.uk. And we also have, as I mentioned last session, a mailing list or discussion list at caps-subscribe at mailman.syntam.co.uk. Sending an empty email to that address will get you signed up. Today we're going to be talking about data capture from paper sorts and also how to get the data out of your online sorting. Obviously data capture isn't a separate process for the online sorts. You set up your online sort and you make it live, and the data is magically collected for you, which sounds fantastic, but regrettably in my experience, because there is no supervision and no real guidance, the quality of online sorting data, to me, can vary a lot depending on your audience and who you've recruited to do the sorting. And certainly when I've been doing a sort with an online panel, there have been a very large number of people who have just done the sort to get the credit for having taken part in the activity. And you don't get quite so much of that with face-to-face research, in my experience. We're going to be looking at the analysis spreadsheets very briefly that all of the SynCaps packages produce, including SynCaps version 1, which is entirely free. So again, you don't need to invest a lot of money to do this. And we'll be looking at Dendrograms, which are actually both one of the most useful analysis results from card sorting, but also one of the most intimidating or confusing. That they certainly don't necessarily make a great deal of sense at first glance. So I'll be explaining those in a bit more detail. And all the packages that we're looking at, plus I think every card sorting package I've ever seen, produces these things called Dendrograms, and we'll talk a bit about those. And we'll also be talking about these other two analyses, item-by-item analyses, which also are called other things in different places. But that's something that I talked about in my interactions article, and now most of the online card sorts, as well as all of this, SynCaps version 2 and SynCaps version 3, produce these matrix analyses, item by items, or sometimes called a similarity matrix. I, in version 2, called it a pairs map, which is, in retrospect, was perhaps not such a great idea, but they're all very similar in concept and sometimes extremely similar in visual presentation. Certainly, since version 2 of SynCaps came out, a number of the online sorting sites have adopted exactly the same layout for that particular analysis. Items by groups analysis as well, to show you all the different group names that people have used in an open or hybrid sort, so for each item where it's been sorted. And then finally, and this is for SynCaps version 3 only, which we'll be talking a lot more about next week, but this seemed a good place to put this particular aspect of it. We'll be looking at how we do nested groups analyses in SynCaps version 3, this ability to allow people to create nested hierarchies of groups, just like you get in an actual website or other navigation scheme. So talking about data capture from paper sorts, the thing with SynCaps is that we've used a very simple file format, and with a few minor exceptions, the file format is exactly the same for all three versions of SynCaps. So version 1, which is the free version, version 2, and version 3. Version 2 introduces something called ad hoc items, which I mentioned a bit further down the slide. Ad hoc items are ones which the user, the participant, has written down an item on a blank item card. And in SynCaps version 2 or version 3, you just type that in when you get to it. In SynCaps version 1, every item has to be assigned an item number, so you actually end up having to make a list of those and going back and assigning item numbers. But it's not such a big deal. Also, often people don't actually generate that many ad hoc items, no matter how much you try to persuade them to. They're very reluctant to do that in many cases. But it does depend on the kind of research you're doing. If you're doing what I might call a naked sort, where you're basically starting with pretty much blank cards, then obviously you will have a lot of ad hoc items, and either you do the list making and the item number assignment yourself, or, as I say, if you use one of the paid versions of SynCaps, it'll do that for you. And also I mentioned nested groups. They're specific to SynCaps version 3, and they use a slightly different file format. So if you take a SynCaps version 3 file with nested groups and try to analyze it in version 1 or version 2, you will get some error messages. For large volumes of data, or if you're doing a lot of barcoding, a lot of card sorting work, then a barcode scanner actually makes life much easier. It's very quick. Certainly, if you look at the short videos I mentioned for tips on technique, it's very easy to get up to 2 cards a second with a barcode scanner and the right sort of manual dexterity. It is a little bit of a slog compared to online sorting, but you know, the best things in life are worth a bit of effort. It really feels like nothing at all. If you could do an entire day's card sorting with say 5 or 6 people in a session and do 3 or 4 of those in a day, and that'll only take you a couple of hours when you get back to the office. And I've actually even done them in situ, so I've finished off the day or done sorting in between groups, barcode scanning in between groups, which just gets the data in a bit quicker. There's nothing magical about it. I mentioned last time about preparing the printed cards. If you use our templates, the barcodes come free, and you can decide to use the templates with or without them. If you use them with, then they're there. If you use them without, then they're not. They don't really get in the way particularly. And in the UK and in Europe, we supply a suitable model with a 5-year guarantee, and we do a little package with a barcode scanner and 2 packs of the perforated cards, which we think is very cost effective. So you can have a look at that at the Card Sort shop if you go to www.syncaps.com or to this more detailed URL shown on the slide. The data files, this simple data file I mentioned, are conceptually in 2 parts. There's a header which lists all the predefined items. So if you've got predefined groups, that's to say if you're doing a hybrid or a closed sort and you've got a list of group names, that they go in the header. And if you have predefined items, and in SynCaps version 1 you have to have predefined items, then those go in the header too. And the header, by the way, is just everything that occurs before the first participant. So that's it. There's nothing terribly magical about the header. It's what happens before the first participant. And of course you can do the data capture and then put the header in later. It doesn't matter what order you do that in. I'll show you some examples of that a bit later on when we get into the demo. The body is mandatory. If you don't have a body, then you don't have anything to process, so that's pretty straightforward. And it starts with the very first participant. And the first participant in SynCaps can be a reference or an expert sort. So it can actually be an expert, somebody who knows about this problem domain and has sorted the cards for you. Or it could be something like your existing or proposed information architecture. I use it a lot when working on intranets to represent the current arrangement of those items. And SynCaps allows you to do produce charts that actually shows the participants' results versus the reference or expert sort. So I'll be showing you some examples of that in just a few minutes. I mentioned that the data file format is simple, and one of the simple aspects of it is that the first letter of each line determines what it is. So it's an I for an item, a G for a group, an S for a subgroup if you're using them. Those are what I call in the documentation anonymous subgroups. You're not allowed to name these particular subgroups. I'll be talking about proper nested groups from version 3 a bit later on, or P for participant. And so the way it normally goes is you have a participant card to say this is a new participant. You have a G card to say this is the participant's first group. Here are the items under that group, and so forth. So it's all extremely straightforward. Blank lines are ignored. I don't have any in the examples that I'm showing because I'm just trying to get more onto the slide, but you can put in as many blank lines as you like. And because people have asked for the ability to put comments into their data, you can, in SynCaps version 3, you can start a line with a slash or a exclamation mark, and SynCaps will just ignore that for you. Here's an example from our sample data set. This is a wine sort that I've been using for a long time as an example. So I've just drawn a line on here to show you where the header is, and you'll notice that the very first thing after the line is a P for participant, and I've called that participant reference, or I could have called it anything I liked. It used to be called P1, but it's up to you, and that participant name will appear in the charts and in the data files if you want it to. But in the header part, we've got this is a closed sort, so we've got 3 groups: dry white, full-bodied red, and sparkling, and so they all start with G. And we then have 12 or 15 items, all beginning with the letter I, and that's it. The first letter, the case isn't important, so it'd be uppercase G, lowercase g, it does not matter. And then in the body, because this is a closed sort, everything can be done by the numbers, as it were. So we have, as soon as we've done the participant card, which has got the participant name that we have to key in, we can then just use a barcode scanner, or we can just type this very easily. G3 means that this participant is now talking about sparkling wines, if you just go back and count down from the top of the file. I4 means item 4 fit 3. So the F in this particular case, if you're using either quality of fit or frequency of use, both of which I talked about in the first webinar, this is a weighting that's applied to the cluster analysis. So the fit 3 means this item was rated by the participant as fitting very well in this particular group. So if you look, item 4 is in fact 1, 2, 3, 4 champagne, so it fits very well into a group called sparkling wines. And so does item 3, which, again, counting down, is cava. So this particular participant, the reference sort, the expert, whatever we want to call it, is very happy with those. And as you can see, starting in the next group, group 1, item 12 has got a fit of only 1, which means it barely fits. And that turns out to be because the group was called full-bodied red, and we'll be seeing some examples of that or some consequences of that a bit later on. If you're not using quality of fit, or if you've got your data from an online website, card sorting website, then you won't have the F data. It'll just go G3, I4, I3, G1, I12, I10, and so forth. So that's the only difference. The quality of fit or the frequency of use, however you want to use that weight, is entirely optional and isn't actually supported by the online sorting services. Just for a bit of fun, here is exactly the same card sort in Russian, if your idea of fun is Russian, but somebody asked me years ago if we could support Cyrillic, and so we converted SynCaps to use what's called Unicode, which covers all languages. So you can take a SynCaps header, get somebody to translate it, and just plug it into data for any country that you care to do the analysis in. And so this is the wines again, by the way. So I don't remember what the order was. Let me just quickly go back a slide. It was dry white, full-bodied red, and sparkling. And so there we have dry white, full-bodied red, and sparkling in Russian at the top. And I really do hope that this is Russian. I have no way of knowing, but it kind of looks like it might be. Kava, for example, looks very plausible. I don't know what these letters are called in Cyrillic, I'm really sorry to say, but that looks like to me like it could be Kava. So anyway, that's in Unicode, and you could convert this into Korean or Chinese, what have you, and it would still work as well. And then finally, just to mention that in SynCaps version 3, you may have noticed I was having to count down to see what item was being referred to. In SynCaps version 3, we've added what's known in the software development trade as a syntax editor. So what it does is to color things according to their meaning, and then it also helpfully provides you with an interpretation. So you type in G3, and it over on the right-hand side in this blue puts in what G3 means from your header. It means sparkling. And so you can actually see what's going on as you do it. And if you were typing the data in, you would immediately see, you type in G3 and up would come sparkling, you type in I4 and up would come champagne, and so forth. You'll also notice that it nicely indents the groups under the participant, so that is an indication that things are going well, that it understands the data and is indenting it accordingly. And if you ever get on to using nested groups, following the G there is a level number. It goes GL and then a level 1, level 2, up to level 9 if you want, and it nests those accordingly too to make to help make sense of the data to you when you're looking at it. Talking about online sorting, I've mentioned it a couple times. The two that I'm most familiar with, and I've used both quite a few times, are web sort and optimal sort. And as it happens, because I've collaborated with those guys in both sites, they will export data in SynCaps format. So you can set up an online sort, and you can just at the end, when you close the sort, say that you want to download the data in SynCaps format. And I'll show you how that's done. That means you don't have to understand the data, by the way. You'll just get a text file. If you open it up, it'll look like the wine data that I was just showing you, but it should be perfectly fit to run. I don't recommend editing the data unless it's to correct mistakes. So if, for example, you don't like some of the names that people have used, or they've misspelt things, or you want to merge different collections of quite similar items or quite similar groups, you can do that either online or with SynCaps itself. So it's entirely your choice. But you can do that in the application. You don't have to change the data to do that. And SynCaps has the advantage of allowing you to say, all of these groups in this particular list, I'd like you to ignore. So if you find that people are making up group names like don't know or never use or don't understand, then you can just say, well, all of these I'd like you to lump together under didn't sort and just ignore them, and it will not put them into the analysis, which I think has some advantages because you really don't want these items ending up in the cluster analysis just because people are not understanding them. So that just drops them out and they get very low scores, and you can see when you get the final results that these items were not understood by participants. The online sorts, web sort and optimal sort, provide very similar analyses to the ones that we're just about to look at, to SynCaps version 2, in fact. But there are a whole list of things which I put on this slide that they don't do, just so that you're aware. They don't do customizable charts. And one of the reasons I really was keen on producing SynCaps version 2 was that the results I was getting from other places just weren't very presentable to customers. So, for example, our dendrograms and our charts, you adjust the color, you adjust the font and the size of the chart and so forth, and they're very easy to drag and drop into reports, office documents, anything that supports the clipboard properly. And I'll show you how that's done in the demo section of this webinar. The online sorting doesn't support this weighting that I mentioned for either quality of fit or frequency of use. The online sorts don't support reference or expert sorts, and they don't support something that versions 2 and 3 of SynCaps do, which is the ability to for participants to put the same item into multiple groups. So if people are not sure where something can go in SynCaps version 2 or version 3, you can just give them another card, and they can either write the item number on it or they can write the text on it exactly as it appears on the original and put it into 2 or more groups, and SynCaps will split that item between those groups, whereas as far as I'm aware, most of the online sorting services do not support that. Something's got to go in one group or another. It can't go into more than one group. SynCaps version 1 does do it sort of. It's not a very sophisticated implementation. You can choose to print multiple sets of cards for each participant. So if you can give each participant 2 sets of cards and ask them to sort those completely, and that gets you the same kind of result, but that's a bit clunky, to be honest. Version 2 and version 3 is much more sophisticated in that respect. In SynCaps version 3, which we're going to talk about in the next webinar, we do participant analysis, and you can, just by ticking a box, say that you don't want participants' names or email addresses to be shown in the charts, which would be potentially embarrassing for your customers or you, or a violation of data protection rules. So that's easily done. You don't get nested groups from online sorts. You don't get you get a kind of participant analysis. I think from Optimal Sort does a limited participant analysis, but we do a pretty full-blown one and filtering in SynCaps v3. And SynCaps v3, for those of you who are really excited about cluster analysis, generates SPSS cluster analysis scripts from the data, and you can then, if you're an SPSS user, just drop those into SPSS and run your own cluster analysis and play with the whole thing in that separate package. And of course, one of the other strengths of SynCaps is that you can use it to analyze both paper and online sorts, or even combine the data from both. So you can do comparisons or combinations. So it's a lot more flexible if you want or need to be able to do that kind of thing. Here's how to get the SynCaps data from Optimal Sort, and both of these instructions I'm just going to briefly mention can be found on www.syncaps.com in the online sorts page, which this is the URL. The full URL is at the bottom here. But it's quite a long page on Optimal Sort. So you go to the Downloads tab, which I've marked in red up here, and there's a whole bunch of stuff, about 2 screens worth. And then towards the very bottom there is a SynCaps data heading, and you click and you get to download all of the data in a .text file, which you can then open up in Notepad or just import directly into SynCaps. It's entirely up to you whether you have a peek at it first. On WebSort, and I believe I checked this and it still looks very much the same. You get a list of participants down the side, which I don't have here. But here is on the Results tab, here is the SynCaps link, and you can just right-click and download to get, again, a text file of all of the participants that you select on the left-hand side here. Now, all 3 versions of SynCaps produce these analysis spreadsheets, which we'll have a quick look at in the demo section. But just to quickly walk you through them, the first one is the cards spreadsheet, which actually just shows you all the cards exactly as they were sorted by participants. So you get the participant name in the left-hand column, you get the group names in the second column, you get all the items in the subsequent columns. So it shows you exactly how things were done. So you don't have to go back to the raw data. You've got it there. And if you, for example, want to use syncaps for processing affinity diagrams, which we provide templates for doing that, and I've talked about it a couple of times in courses, but it's just a really easy way of capturing the data from affinity diagramming to produce pre-printed cards with the things, the research that you've collected from participants, the observations, and then you could use barcode scanner to say how these things were organized in your affinity diagramming workshop. So that, for example, would come out in the cards analysis, so the cards spreadsheet. The items spreadsheet tells you how consistently each of your items was sorted, and if you're using these weights, either quality of fit or frequency of use, then you get the average score there as well. The matrices, you get a few. In syncaps version 2, you get an unweighted matrix, which just shows you how things were done without taking count of any quality of fit or frequency of use. So this is basically how often each pair of items appeared together in a group in that particular matrix, called the unweighted similarity matrix is the full title. There's also at the bottom of this list the weighted similarity matrix, which simply, as the name suggests, includes things like quality of fit. And then also there is a participants analysis, which shows you how many groups each participant produced, what their average quality of fit was, how consistent their results are with others, and so forth. Finally, also, syncaps version 3 produces a similarity matrix for participants. So this actually shows you how similar the different participants who took part in your card sort were in the way that they sorted cards, and similarly to the SPS script for cluster analysis of the item matrix, there's also one for the cluster analysis of the participant matrix. And if you're a frequent user of some of the online sorts, some of these should also be familiar to you. I know that a couple, Optimal Sort at least, does produce a number of these spreadsheets that you can download and plug into Excel, for example. In our spreadsheet, I'll just quickly mention that there are two alignment figures. One's called the average alignment, and it's telling you how similar an item or a participant is to other items or participants, or the average of them, I should say. So you can find out over a particular participant or over a particular item how consistently that item was sorted with respect to others by average. Or you can also find out, if you've used an expert or reference sort, how similar people or items were to that sort. So how much alignment, how much agreement there was between a given item and the way it was sorted by the expert. So we'll look at these in the demonstration I'm going to be doing. Some of this is a little bit abstract and hard to follow without a concrete example. So I'll show you some concrete examples, and I'm sure it'll look a little bit more intelligible in just a few minutes. This is a spreadsheet that I used to create on a regular basis from syncaps version 1. This is from the item analysis, and I'll show you a very brief example of how to create this. How to do this kind of thing actually is in our instructions for syncaps. If you download either syncaps version 1 or syncaps version 2, as part of the download you'll get processing instructions, and they tell you how to do interesting and fun things with the various kinds of analysis spreadsheets that come out, as well as the main charts. Just to introduce the dendrograms, hopefully you've seen them before if you've done any card sorting, but they are a bit frightening if you haven't. The word dendro is Latin from the Greek for tree, dendron, meaning tree. And it's just a really common way of showing the results of what's called hierarchical cluster analysis, which is the most common form of cluster analysis that we use in card sorting. And these hierarchies are based entirely on how often the items appear together in the same groups. So it's not a taxonomic hierarchy at all, because of course as information architects we go off and produce taxonomies which are also hierarchical, but these hierarchies produced in card sorting are actually not taxonomic hierarchies at all. They're simply based on how often things appeared together in the same group. And an interesting aside is that both the cluster analysis and the resulting dendrograms take no notice of group names. So all that they're looking at is how often people put the same cards together in the same groups. So this is a really simple dendrogram from SynCaps version 1, and I think you'll find this in numerous articles that I've produced over the years. And this particular example is probably about 10 years, maybe 8 years old, something like that. And the dendrogram, and I do the dendrogram running left to right, so that means I can start all my items in a neat column, which makes it easier to read, I think. You'll find in lots of places that it's done right to left, which to me just seems backwards, but never mind. Here you'll see that it's the short branches that are the strongest, like in a real tree. So the fact that Riesling and White Zinfandel have these short branches where they're joined indicate that these guys appeared very frequently together. So most participants group those two together. Whereas if we look at a slightly more, slightly longer branch, Pinot Grigio, is actually not very strongly connected with these other white wines because people got confused about the word Pinot. You know, the Pinot often appears in Pinot Noir, which is a very common red grape, and people, this was done years ago, 8 years ago, so Pinot Grigio perhaps wasn't even as popular as it is now. People were thinking it was a red wine and weren't entirely sure. So that's a dendrogram, and you can choose these background colors if you want to use them at all. The more recent versions of SynCaps v1 actually put dashed lines in between the groups. So all the SynCaps programs choose a number of groups based on the average across all the participants. And since this was a closed sort, all of the participants produce 3 groups. But you'll find in open sorts you get quite a range, so you can play with it. It doesn't change anything in terms of the dendrogram. It just changes the splits either using the dashed lines or the colored backgrounds. Other charts that are produced, well, we'll have a quick look at what I call now items by items. I used to call it a pairs map. SynCaps version 2 calls it a pairs map. And I noticed that Optimal Sort produces this now. It looks almost exactly like the SynCaps chart, but they call it a similarity chart. And that's because it's based on the similarity matrix. There's also an items by groups chart that I'll show you. And I'll show you how SynCaps represents this reference or export sort if you're using it. And then finally, just going to spend a minute or two talking about the nested groups that SynCaps version 3 allows you. So this is what used to be called a pairs map in version 2. It's now called an items by items chart in version 3. And this is for a very large intranet. And so we can see a lot of agreement, this dark blue. And if we were using the program live, we could click on one of these cells and it would give us the exact figures. But these are typically very close to 100% agreement. And the black centers represent the expert or reference sort. So what we're seeing here with the dark blue outsides, which represent the participants' results, and the black centers, is that this is a lot of agreement between participants and a lot of agreement with the reference sort. So that means that things are where people are expecting to find them. Until we come down here to explore market salaries, where we can see that participants have lumped them with all these other pay and bonus items, but in fact they are, it's not shown on this particular chart, in the actual intranet in question they were grouped somewhere completely differently. So this is something that says, this is really an alarm bell saying this isn't where people think it ought to be. But we see some more agreement further down the steps, and the steps are actually a good sign. If you've got solid sort of triangular steps like this down the diagonal, that's a good thing. If you've got lots of noise out in the body of the chart, then that's a bad thing. That means that people were not agreeing about where these things go. And you can see an example of that down here. Here we have an example of where we've got some superficial matching that should have been dealt with, in my opinion. I'm told, the customer told me they had reasons for doing it this way, but they got fairly predictable results as a consequence, was that all the managings were grouped by some people simply because of the superficial similarity of the word managing. So that's what this disagreement is about down here. A lot of other participants, however, did look more closely at what was being described and grouped them with these other items to do with learning and team development and so forth. This is the items by groups chart. This is a fairly simple example. If you're doing an open sort, you actually often will find maybe hundreds of group names across the top, I'm sorry to say. And again, it's a similar sort of deal that the dark blue outsides indicate. And in fact, here's an example. If you click on it in the application, this is telling us that this pale blue around the outside represents 9% of participants, but it represents 100% of the expert. Because the results could be weighted, and it actually puts a percentage. Typically, the percentage is either 33, 66, or 100. If it's not weighted, then it's either 0 or 100 for the expert sort. And then this is just to show you the difference between using the expert sort, which is on the right here, and not using it, which is on the left. And these are actually two different sets of participants, so the results are slightly different. But the black, again, is showing you how the supposed expert, it was just me, in fact, sorting these as I saw fit, how the experts' results compared with the participants. And again, where there's a dark blue outside, and you get to choose the color, by the way, but blue is the default. The dark blue outside represents the participants, and the center, if it's white, it means that isn't where the expert put it. And because, again, the weighting's being used, here we have a weight which looks like about 1/3. This might have been a fair fit, using quality of fit. Nested groups, these are the slides, actually these next three slides from part one of the webinar, so I put them in here just for completeness, but just to mention that SynCaps version 3, when it comes out hopefully next month, will support up to 9 levels of nesting. We saw, well, I'll show you an example of what that looks like in just a second. Here it is, in fact. So this is, if you use them, here's a card where users can just, or participants can just tick which of 4 levels. But if you want to use more levels, you don't have to use the barcodes. You can just get people to write the level number on. Or, of course, the researcher or the facilitator can write the level number on if you just get people to organize things, get participants to organize their hierarchy on the table. And then when you go to gather it up, you can actually say, well, this is a top level, this is level number 1, this is a sub-level number 2, this is level number 3. And what SynCaps does is to use the levels for weighting, which is described here on slide 26. So it's to do with whether items appeared together in the same subgroups or whether they were in child groups. So that determines the overall weighting they get in the cluster analysis. But we also do this thing called a subgroups by groups chart. And what this is doing is showing you every single group name at each level. So at level 1 in this particular example, we had fruit, hard fruit, vegetables, etc. Then at level 2 we had apples and pears, citrus fruit, and so forth. And you'll notice that although we're using the expert sort, that's what the hollow centers mean, they're not shown on here. And that's because this particular interactive technology is actually a set of digital scales, and the implementers just didn't allow for nested groups. So it was not possible to have nested groups. So in this particular chart, the expert results are not shown because there was no nesting. But what we'll see, if we could see the whole of this particular chart, what we'd see is that we've got these level 1 groups. We then have level 2, root vegetables and greens, and then there's also further down the page the level 3s that were nested under these level 2s. So it's giving you a blow-by-blow analysis of how many people did these various levels of nesting. So I've run over a little bit on the prepared part of the presentation, but we still have about 10 minutes left for the demos, which is fine, and then another 5 minutes for questions. Again, if you're watching the live webinar and you've got any questions you want to ask now, then please use the GoToWebinar question interface. If the questions occur to you later or you're watching the recording, then email me at william.hudson@cintam.co.uk. And I'll just briefly mention my couple of commercial messages that if you're interested in beta testing SynCaps version 3, and preferably if you are an existing SynCaps user, so some of this will already be familiar to you, then do please let me know, and we're arranging for a handful of sites to try it out over the next few weeks. And my new book is actually finally in both Amazon.com and Amazon.co.uk. It's called Lighting the Road Ahead, borrowing from Bill Gates's book of 1995 called The Road Ahead, which was his view of the directions that technology were going to take. And Lighting the Road Ahead is all about making the future of technology a brighter, safer place from a usability, accessibility, and search engine optimization point of view. So have a look at that, and you may find it useful for explaining to customers or colleagues why user-centered design is important, and usability and accessibility, and how they all fit together and help each other. So I'm going to stop the slideshow at that point. I'm going to go and show you a number of things. This, as I mentioned earlier on, the syncaps.com location takes you into the Cintam website at the right place for all of the resources I've been talking about. What I wanted to show you was the very simple data format. So here is some sample data that you can find in the website. You just download the combined instructions, sample data, and templates zip file. And one of them is the wine sample data that I've been talking about. So I'm just going to click on that, and that's going to come up in Notepad. And so here it is, and as I mentioned, we could type this in or we could use a barcode scanner. It doesn't really matter, but I thought I'd show you also what it looks like in SynCaps version 3. So let me just get that open, and here we go. This is the syntax editor in SynCaps version 3, and what you'll notice is that if I change something up the top here, it changes in all of the places that it's used further down the page. So I've now forgotten what that said originally. So it said dry white, so I'm going to change that to just white, and you'll see that it changes. If I was adding a new participant, if I come down here and start typing G2, and then it says that was full-bodied red, item 4, champagne, which isn't terribly good. If I type something silly in, it will say, what are you talking about? And give you 3 question marks. And if you start putting things in here which don't make any sense, like starting a line with Z, it'll just leave it there colored black to indicate that that's not really what it was expecting. So you'll get error message. If you were to go ahead and process this, you'd actually get an error message from SynCaps, which would then tell you that line 20 was faulty and take you to it to edit it. But that's the syntax editor for you. And it does a lot of nice things as well, like if you're on a participant line, you want to go to the next participant, you just go Control down arrow, and it'll jump to the next participant. The cursor's disappeared because of the screen recording, which is a little bit embarrassing. But let me see if I can get it back. No, it's just gone. You can see the screen slightly flickering because of the GoToWebinar recording, so that's slightly interfered with how this actually works in practice, but that's not a big deal. I'm not going to save this. And I'll just quickly show you in version 2 what a typical processing sequence looks like. So let me just run SynCaps version 2. And it invites you to enter an input file, and I'm going to go straight to, where am I going to go straight to? I think I've got something in my temp directory here, so let me just go straight to my temp directory. Yes, go to SynCaps sample data. And this is where we set the various options. It's ticked the use quality of fit because it's found quality of fit data present in the data. We could turn that off if we decided not to use it. If our first participant is an expert or reference sort, then you can tick that, and I will because it is. This isn't present. These two steps here, merge groups and merge items, aren't present in SYNCAPS version 1, but everything else is. So it's only a 3-step process in version 1. It's a 5-step process in version 2 and 3. And here, if we wish to, we could identify open group names that people have provided us which need merging together, and we could use this interface to merge them. We don't need to do that. Similarly here, exactly the same dialogue, but now it's items, and it's telling us that these were used 13 times. There aren't any write-in items or anything that we need to merge. And sometimes the things you need to merge are just funny spellings or slight variations on wording. And so you can enter those. You select them on the left, add them, give this group a name like new group, which isn't terribly exciting. I'm not going to save that, but I'll just, that's how you do it. And it'll ask me, do you want to save that? And I say, no, I don't. So we'll carry on. Now, here are the different data files that get created. And if I click this open checkbox, it'll actually open all of these using whatever the default is on this system for opening.csv files. And if you've got Microsoft Office installed, then usually it's Excel. So what we're going to see is a great flurry of Microsoft Excel spreadsheets opening in a second. So there we go. This is, it says at the top, the weighted matrix. And so this is how many times with the quality of fit taken into account, Claret and Cabernet Sauvignon were sorted together. 23, so that's weighted because there are only 13 participants, so this includes some weighting. You can see that from the results. And typically that is actually the highest score in this particular sort. We've got quite a few zeros where, for example, Chardonnay was never sorted with Claret because people realized that Chardonnay is a white wine and Claret's a red and so forth. So that's the weighted matrix. And you can do an interesting analysis of this, actually, which I used to do in older versions of Excel. The latest versions of Excel don't do it quite so nicely. I'll show you what I mean in a minute. But I do something called a surface map, and it looks like this. And I'll just move this to a separate page. So move the chart to a new sheet. And it does unhelpful things like leaving out every other item name. So I'm going to tell it I want items one at a time, and I want them in reverse order so they make sense. And I'm going to do that down here too on that axis. So format axis, interval 1, categories in reverse order. And now we actually have the kind of, that's not quite right. Excuse me one second. Something's not gone right. We don't want the categories in the horizontal axis in reverse order. Sorry about that. Okay, so we can actually see our groups. This is the full-bodied red group at the top here. This is our sparkling group in the middle. And this is our white group with these kind of outliers, these little stragglers out the outside edge. Now the thing is, this actually used to be much more obvious. I find this particular display visually very distracting. And if you go back to articles that I've written before Office version 2007 came out, let me just see if I can find you that example. I think it's in the PDF here. Here we go. That's from an article I wrote years ago. That's the Excel version 2003. It's actually much easier to look at, so it's much flatter. So that is the full-bodied red. This is white with some stragglers, which are some Beaujolais and Claret that got thrown in, and then the sparkling is down here. But this is actually what's coming out in the items by items analysis. We're just getting half of it, and I'll show you that in just a second. But that's one of the things you can do with spreadsheets. You can also do things like if I find the items, here, there's a participant spreadsheet. I'm just going to try to find the other spreadsheet. This is the data spreadsheet. So as I mentioned, it's got the participants in column 1, the groups in column 2, and the items in column 3. Those are the matrices. Where's my other spreadsheet? I've lost it. Oh, no, I'm looking for the item spreadsheet and I'm not finding it. I'm sorry to say, I don't know what's happened to it. Oh, there it is. No, that's participants. But here's, this will do. This is for each participant is showing us the average alignment between participants and the average alignment with the expert. Now, given that participant number 1 in this example was the expert, then they agree perfectly. But for example, participant number 3 has only got a 51% agreement with the expert. Participant number 4 has only got a 49% participant agreement with the expert. So these come out of all versions of SynCaps, and depending on what you're after, they may actually be very useful in providing extra data. Here are some examples of the actual charts from SynCaps version 2. So there's the items by items, and in all of the versions, in versions 2 and in version 3, the chart size is determined by the font size. So if you want this bigger, you just make the font bigger. And if you want the font to be totally different, I don't know what batang is. It looks like that. The line doesn't follow the same direction as the text, which is a bit unfortunate. But let's see what else we've got. Berlin's Sans. Something funny. I know what it is. It's because the screen resolution on my machine is not set to the correct aspect ratio. That's why that's coming out. I deliberately set it to the wrong aspect ratio, so the recordings come out okay. But that means it does do funny things on some applications. So this wouldn't happen in real life. There's Bodoni. And again, as I say, we can do whatever we like here. And then that's a bit over big. I'll go back to something like 18. You can do really straightforward things like opening up a new page in, there's a blank sheet in Word. You can go to this, grab it anywhere it's not going to provide data. Here's an example of it showing you data, by the way. You just click again and it goes away. But if I grab this away from the center part, I can then drag it down to Word. This is just a very weird way that Windows works. I drag it down to Word. It says I can't drop it, but it does show me where I can drop it. So I can now get document 4, which I just opened up, and I can drop that in there. And because it uses something called Windows Metafile format, I can scale this however I like, and it will still end up looking nice. Okay, so I can stretch it, and the text, you'll notice, doesn't do weird things. And in Word, I can just say I want it to be a floating position, so I do that by going to Position Text Wrapping in front of text, and I can now move that around on the page and do whatever I like with it. So it's a really nice way of incorporating it into reports. And as I mentioned, you don't actually have to stick with the blue if you don't like it. You can choose any old color you want. We could go for a kind of a horrible pink. There we go. And the central color can be changed as well. So maybe avert your eyes when I do this. I'm going to make it pink and orange, which is truly awful. So that wasn't a good idea. But you've got full control there. So that was one of the motivations to allow you to produce charts that were presentable. And I promise in the real world the lines line up with the actual text. As I mentioned, it's just because I've got the aspect ratio of this screen set incorrectly. Okay, I'll stop there. There is a lot more to say. In the half-day course I run at Chi, I show a lot more examples, and you get to try this stuff yourself. You get cards and a barcode scanner to try out, and you get to install the software and so forth. So lots of things are possible. And we do also run these courses in-house wherever you like. If you've got enough people, we can do it in the States as well. But I have run it in a number of places in the UK and in Europe. So do let me know if you've got any questions using the GoToWebinar question interface, or as I've said, if you are watching the recording, or the questions only occur to you after we finish, which is often the case, then use my email address, which is there. If you're watching a recording or questions occur to you after the webinar, email me, william.hudson@cintam.co.uk. So I'll hang on for a minute and see if we've got any questions. The recording should be available on the cincaps.com subsite of cintam.co.uk. If not tomorrow, then certainly by Monday. Depends on whether we have any challenges with actually doing the recordings, processing the recordings. There are no questions, so I'll thank you for listening, and hope to have you on session number 3. Thanks very much. Bye.